It is President Obama, and it is what you allude to in your article today on 9/11 and remembering 9/11. And here is a statement he made in 2009 in Strasbourg, France, talking about, well, our arrogance. He also talked about anti-Americanism coming from Europe, just to be clear. But here was his first part of the statement. Roll it.
In America, there's a failure to appreciate Europe's leading role in the world. Instead of celebrating your dynamic union and seeking to partner with you to meet common challenges, there have been times where America has shown arrogance and been dismissive, even derisive.
This is a part of an idea that you mentioned in the fact that when we are dealing with our enemy on 9/11, even in the characterization of our past action with our allies, we get the story wrong, or at least President Obama gets the story wrong in identifying the source of our enemy's ideology in the sense of why they want to kill us. Your thoughts, Andy?
Well, I think that's exactly right, Crane. They have not, the Obama administration has not been interested in the ideology that fuels the violence that's committed against us and the broader threat that exists to our civilization. That was obvious in Obama's first statements as president, some of which are the statements that you played. It's obvious as late as today when the American embassy in Egypt has been attacked by a mob of Islamists who were apparently chanting, according to the Egyptian press, Obama, Obama, there are still a billion Osamas. And what is our response? Our embassy puts out a statement basically apologizing for Americans who are using their free speech rights to evidently make a movie that's critical of some aspect of Islam, which is the way it goes in civilized countries. So the onus is put by our own government, not on the savagery of Islamic supremacists, which is such a commonplace, but on American constitutional rights. It's just mind-boggling.
How specifically do we need to do a better job in policing, investigating, and preventing attacks? Because I know a lot of you are saying, Crane, ask about where you were when you were on 9/11. We can talk about that, but what I want to do is I want to know, since 9/11, have we improved, and where can we still improve? Because I've noticed some things since you've written Willful Blindness that you write about in Willful Blindness, the wall of separation between agencies, but you also have political correctness. So specifically, how are we fighting Islamists today on our own soil?
Well, Crane, I don't think you could do a better job than our intelligence and military men in the field, or men and women, I should say, in the field have done. The brute fact is that killed and captured terrorists don't conduct attacks. And the reason that we haven't been attacked in 11 years, despite the fact that we know we have enemies who are working night and day to try to accomplish that, is precisely because of the extraordinary people we have who are filling jobs that require or that call for them to protect us. They've done a remarkable job. So any critique, I think, of what we do has to at least acknowledge the great success. We have not had a reprise of 9/11, even though we know the enemy is trying. Unfortunately, the job of the people who are trying to protect us is much harder because of precisely what you're talking about, which is political correctness. And that's not just an Obama administration program. That's been a government-wide, problem. It's not just an Obama administration problem. It's been a government-wide problem no matter which party's administrations have been in power. So that continues to be a big problem. And I think the biggest problem is that we absolutely steadfastly refuse to grapple with the ideology that fuels terrorism. So we operate on the fiction that terrorists are irrational, wanton killers who basically kill for no reason, not any identifiable motivation. When they conduct a mass murder attack at an office place, we don't look at it as a jihadist atrocity. We look at it incredibly as workplace violence. We simply will not acknowledge the fact that they have an ideology. There is a logic to what they do. There is a reason or a set of reasons why they despise us. Those reasons tell us what their ambitions are. And as long as we won't grapple with that, then we are going to forever be in a position of trying to be a step ahead of, as they call them, violent extremists, but never in a position of defeating their ideology.
In your first book, Willful Blindness, you talk about how we knew the blind sheik was a terrorist in essence, yet we still let him in.
Right. And
from what I gather, we knew in the most recent mass attack on our country, which would be Fort Hood, you can disagree with me, but we knew what was going on there. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I totally agree with you. In fact, I think you and I may have discussed this before. There were twice as many people killed at Fort Hood than were killed at the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which we never had any trouble labeling as anything other than what it was, which was a terrorist attack. Now, years later, we look at Fort Hood, which was in many ways a worse atrocity, since not only more people were killed, but basically it was an attack on our armed forces as they were deploying to try to make life better for Muslims overseas. And yet our tongues are tied. We won't call it what it is, which is a jihadist attack. And that's because, probably the worst sign of weakness, the worst indicator of weakness that you could flash to the enemy is that we are willing to allow our enemies to define us. So we are so frightened of being smeared as at war with Islam, as if we were to grapple with the ideology that fuels the campaign against us, we would somehow be in a shooting war with 1.4 billion Muslims. That's how absurd it is. Yet, because we're so frightened of being labeled as at war with Islam and being smeared as racists and and Islamophobes and the other calumnies that are listed against us by not only jihadists but their sympathizers, we have become paralyzed by political correctness, and this is what happens when you allow your enemies to define you. We need to not worry about them and do what we need to do in order to protect the United States, which, by the way, is really pretty much the only reason we have a federal government. And I know the federal government's a behemoth now, and it does all sorts of things that would probably shock James Madison. But the only thing that we really have a federal government for, the reason that we needed it in the first place, the main reason, was to protect the United States from threats to our national security. And here we have a profound threat to our national security, and we won't even allow ourselves to think about what motivates them.
And interestingly enough, I'd like to get Cut 8 ready, because this is from the same speech. And I know I'm going back to 2009, but the underlying point I want to make here is you highlighted something that you knew in 1993. And now we know, again, 2009. And again, we are still at the same place, yet we've had 9/11 in between, and yet we haven't identified it. And I know you've said it a few times, but I want people to realize that if we don't get this right, we're never going to get it right on the mass scale. This is the foundation of everything. Here is President Obama talking about, well, our history, Abu Ghraib, and, for that matter, Gitmo. Roll it.
In dealing with terrorism, we can't lose sight of our values and who we are. That's why I closed Guantanamo. That's why I made very clear that we will not engage in certain interrogation practices. I don't believe that there is a contradiction between our security and our values. And when you start sacrificing your values, when you lose yourself, then over the long term that will make you less secure. When we saw what happened in Abu Ghraib, that wasn't good for our security. That was a recruitment tool for terrorism. Humiliating people is never a good strategy to battle terrorism. So we are going to conduct our operations in a way that reflect our best selves and make sure that we are proud.
All right. Now, Andy, taking that information, Abu Ghraib and Gitmo, you can apply it to the recent taking out of al-Qaeda's number 2 in Yemen. You can apply it to your article today in the measure to observe behavior, but also profile and get information for mosques. You can take it anywhere you want to go, but I want to know specifically, with President Obama's understanding of what makes our enemy tick and what our role is and how we're interpreted in the world, does he have that wrong from the outset?
Well, he has it wrong by his own account because he didn't close Gitmo. I mean, if you just took it on his own terms, he hasn't closed Gitmo. And he hasn't closed Gitmo for a very good reason. Now that he's responsible for the national security of the United States, he has to weigh the nonsense that we just heard, and it really was. I mean, some of it was borderline incoherent, and most of it was just moronic. But he has to weigh that stuff against what his actual obligations are, and he made the calculation that Guantanamo Bay needed to stay open.